Hello and welcome to The Explainer. If you're a focused learner looking to cut through the noise and get straight to the facts, well, you are definitely in the right place. Today, we are unpacking what is arguably the most successful political smear campaign in ancient history. We're talking about Cleopatra. Get ready because the history you thought you knew is about to be turned completely upside down.
So, let's dive right into this. When you hear the name Cleopatra, what instantly pops into your head? A snake-wielding seductress? Maybe a tragic romantic heroine popularized by Shakespeare and heavily reinforced by modern Hollywood? Well, what if I told you that almost all of that is ancient fake news? Seriously, today we're going to use the actual historical record to separate the real woman from the myth.
We are dealing with a massive contrast here. On one side, we've got the Hollywood myth, the insatiable seductress and power-hungry manipulator. And on the other, the historical reality, a brilliant scholar who is the victim of state-sponsored Roman propaganda. This imaginary pop culture Cleopatra was quite literally born out of Roman fear and political necessity, and it ended up completely overshadowing the very real history preserved by other cultures.
Section 1. Ancient Rome's Fake News, the Propaganda Machine. Now, to truly understand this myth, we have to look closely at the people who actually created it.
See, Roman writers, specifically those working under the rising leader Octavian, who you probably know later became the Emperor Augustus, they acted essentially as political spin doctors. Just listen to the sheer outrage in this quote from the Roman poet Horace, written right after the Battle of Actium. The idea that Mark Antony, a highly respected Roman soldier, would ally himself with an Egyptian queen was treated as an absolute abomination. To Rome, this wasn't just a military alliance, it was a profound, deeply shocking betrayal of their entire worldview.
Which brings us to Section 2, the ultimate political scapegoat disguising a civil war. You see, Octavian had a massive PR problem on his hands. He was fighting a messy, bloody civil war against a fellow Roman, Mark Antony.
But civil wars are deeply unpopular. Octavian desperately needed a foreign scapegoat to distract the public and smooth his own rise to absolute dictator. Enter Cleopatra. Octavian pulled this off by aggressively weaponizing traditional Roman family values. He championed military austerity, plain living, sobriety, and strict male-dominated rule. By heavily promoting these specific virtues, Octavian made the dazzling wealth, the luxury, and especially the female leadership of Egypt look not just different, but like a terrifying existential threat to the Roman way of life.
He essentially unleashed Augustan poets like attack dogs against her character. I mean, just listen to the poet Perpetuated here. It is absolutely vicious. They aggressively defamed her to justify Octavian's war and vilify her influence over Antony. They weren't writing history, they were writing a hit piece. The whole goal was to ensure Antony looked like a weak puppet and Cleopatra looked like a total monster. Moving on to Section 3, Weaponizing Gender and Ethnicity, the Intersection of Fear. This Roman smear campaign didn't just attack her as an enemy of the state, it specifically targeted exactly who she was. To really get the mechanics of this smear campaign, we have to talk about intersectionality. That's how overlapping social identities, like ethnicity and gender, compound to make someone a unique target for prejudice. The Romans didn't just hate Cleopatra because she was a woman, and they didn't just hate her because she was Egyptian. They purposefully combined deep-seated misogyny with extreme xenophobia to create the ultimate other.
The Romans constructed this incredibly rigid black-and-white binary. Their own ideal was framed as masculine, sober, and in control, often symbolized by celebratory Cuban wine. In total opposition to that, they framed the Egyptian stereotype as feminine, drunk, and frenzied. Horace literally wrote that Cleopatra was driven mad by Egyptian Mariotic wine. They directly associated her ethnicity and gender with a total loss of rational control.
And this fear went way beyond just Cleopatra herself. Roman texts mocked her followers as a contaminated flock, calling them half-men and eunuchs. This highlights a deep underlying Roman terror of Egyptian gender role reversals. The Romans cast these great generals, like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, as emasculated victims who'd been corrupted by Eastern luxury and female dominance. To the Romans, Cleopatra's real crime wasn't just existing, it was making powerful men submissive.
All right, we are going to make a sharp mental pivot here away from Rome entirely. Section 4. The Arab Scholar Queen, a Forgotten Reality. In the medieval Arabic and Muslim imagination, a completely different reality of Cleopatra was preserved. To them, she wasn't some wicked seductress. She was famously known as the Virtuous Scholar. Arabic texts document this absolutely staggering list of real accomplishments. She was a polymath and a philosopher. She made real advancements in alchemy. She had deep expertise in medicine, a mastery of mathematics, and she drove monumental architecture. I mean, this reality completely destroys the whole seductress myth. She was an absolute powerhouse of intellect and capability.
We can see how deeply embedded she was in the Eastern historical record just by looking at the language itself. Centuries of Arabic transliterations of her name show this profound ongoing fascination with her. Scholars like Agapius even romantically interpreted her name as the Weeping Rock. Their immense respect for her intellect is literally woven right into their historical texts.
Furthermore, she was remembered as the Great Builder. She is credited with massive feats of engineering, like the Alexandria Canal that brought fresh water to the city, the royal palace on the island of Pharos, and a massive causeway. Her architectural legacy was so vast that later historians sometimes even conflated her with other mythical builder queens. She wasn't just sitting around ruling Egypt. She was actively, physically developing it.
And instead of being a frenzied seductress, she's actually described as presiding over massive intellectual gatherings at her court, where scholars from all these various disciplines came together to engage in learned debate. Think about the striking whiplash here. On one hand, you have the Roman vitriol calling her a frenzied whore, and on the exact opposite side, the Arabic narrative reveres her as an intellectual host, actively engaging in high-level academic debates.
So you're probably wondering, why don't we know this version of her? Section 5, History Written by Victors, The Enduring Myth. Tragically, the primary Egyptian sources on her reign were lost when the Library of Alexandria was destroyed and her Delta residence was lost to time. Because her own records vanished, the hostile Roman narrative, written by the victors, of course, became the loudest surviving voice.
It is fascinating and kind of wild to trace how this PR campaign evolved over the centuries. It starts as immediate political spin in 31 BCE, right after Octavian's victory. A year later, Horace is publishing poetry about her so-called madness. Almost a century later, Lucan is writing about her deadly beauty. And by the 2nd century, Plutarch is writing the exact puppet master narrative that eventually inspires Shakespeare and subsequently the modern Hollywood movies we know today. It's basically a 2,000-year game of telephone.
And get this, even her famous death by snakebite is likely part of the spin. The snake was a powerful, highly sacred Egyptian emblem, but Roman writers like Horace and Virgil totally twisted it into a poetic metaphor to describe a bizarre, foreign suicide. It was likely a complete fiction, carefully crafted to subvert her power in her final moments and permanently stamp her with an exotic otherness in the minds of the Roman public.
Which brings us to our final and perhaps most important question of this explainer. If the myth of Cleopatra, who is undeniably one of the most famous women in human history, is largely just a highly successful Roman PR campaign, what other historical truths have been completely erased by the victors? It really makes you realize why media literacy matters so much, not just for the news we consume today, but for how we understand the history of yesterday. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.